The break room smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. He wiped down the counter slowly, methodically, while voices bounced off the walls around him. Talk of promotions, bonuses, weekend trips to places with names he couldn't pronounce. Someone laughed too loud. Someone else complained about their parking spot being too far from the entrance. He wrung out the cloth and moved to the next table. Hello guys. Welcome to my channel where ordinary situations turn into unforgettable twists. Every story begins with something simple and ends with a truth no one sees coming. These are emotion-packed, short-form stories about strangers, secrets, unexpected kindness, shocking revelations, and life-changing moments that happen when you least expect them. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comment section below. His name was Marcus, though most people in the building didn't bother learning it. To them, he was just the janitor. The man who emptied trash bins, mopped hallways, and made sure the bathrooms didn't smell like regret by Monday morning. He wore the same navy blue uniform every day, drove an old pickup truck that coughed black smoke, and kept his head down. Success in this office was measured in titles: vice president, senior director, regional manager. It was measured in the cut of your suit, the brand of your watch, the speed at which your name appeared on the company newsletter. People here moved fast, talked faster, and judged everyone by how high they'd climbed. Marcus had climbed nowhere. At least that's what they thought. "Hey, Marcus!" someone called from across the room. It was Derek, a junior analyst with gelled hair and a tie that cost more than Marcus's weekly groceries. "You ever think about, doing something bigger? You know, moving up?" Marcus glanced over, his expression calm. "I'm good where I am." Derek smirked and nudged the woman beside him. "See? That's the problem. No ambition." The woman, Sandra, from accounting, laughed politely, though her eyes didn't quite meet Marcus's. "It's just, you've been here for years, right? Don't you want more?" Marcus folded the cloth and tucked it into his cart. More isn't always better. They didn't understand. They couldn't. To them, more meant corner offices and executive parking. More meant your face on the website, your name in bold on the quarterly report. More meant being seen. Marcus had never needed to be seen. He pushed his cart down the hallway, past the glass-walled conference rooms where people gestured wildly during meetings, past the cubicles where keyboards clacked like drumbeats, past the executive floor where the air smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. No one looked at him. No one ever did. In the parking lot after his shift, he climbed into his truck and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. The engine sputtered to life, and he pulled out slowly, passing rows of sleek sedans and polished SUVs. His truck looked like a relic in comparison. Faded paint, rusted bumper. A crack across the windshield he'd been meaning to fix for months. He didn't mind. At home, he heated up leftover soup and ate it standing by the kitchen counter, scrolling through emails on his phone. Most were routine maintenance schedules, supply orders, shift confirmations. One caught his attention. A meeting request from Helen, the company's chairlady. He'd see her next week. Helen was his sister-in-law, though almost no one at the office knew that. She'd married his younger brother 5 years ago, and their family gatherings were warm and chaotic, full of laughter, teasing, and too much food. But at work, they kept their distance. Professional boundaries, she'd said. He'd agreed. It wasn't hard. Marcus had always been good at keeping things separate. The next morning, he arrived early, as always. The building was quiet at 6 a.m., the fluorescent lights humming softly as he unlocked the supply closet and began his rounds. He liked this time of day, the stillness, the solitude, the sense that the world hadn't yet woken up to demand things from him. By 8 o'clock, the office was alive again.
Phones rang.
Meetings started. People rushed past him with coffee cups and leather portfolios, their faces tight with focus. "Morning, Marcus," someone said without looking. "Morning," he replied. In the elevator, 2 men in suits discussed the upcoming merger. Apparently, the company was joining forces with a larger firm, something that would triple their market share, expand their reach, and secure everyone's future. or so they hoped. "This is huge," one of them said. "If we play this right, we're all getting promoted." "Think they'll bring in new executives?" the other asked. "Probably. But if you've been here long enough, you've got a shot." Marcus stood in the corner, holding his mop, invisible as always. The doors opened, and the men stepped out, still talking. Marcus followed, veering left toward the restrooms while they turned right toward the executive wing. He scrubbed toilets that morning. He wiped mirrors. He refilled soap dispensers and replaced paper towels. It was honest work, simple work, and he did it well. At lunch, he sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, eating a sandwich he'd packed from home. Across the room, a group of coworkers laughed loudly, celebrating someone's promotion. One of them glanced over at Marcus and whispered something. Another laughed. He didn't react. He'd learned long ago that not every insult deserved a response. Because the truth was, Marcus had nothing to prove. Not to Derek, not to Sandra, not to anyone in this building who measured worth by salary and status. He finished his sandwich, threw away his trash, and returned to work. That afternoon, as he mopped the third-floor hallway, he overheard a conversation drifting from an open office door. "Did you see him today? Still wearing that same old uniform?" "I know. It's kind of sad, honestly." "You think he's broke?" "Definitely. I mean, look at his truck." Marcus kept mopping. The floor gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, streaks of soap reflecting like glass. He moved steadily, rhythmically, the way he always did. They didn't know. They couldn't know. And that was fine, because Marcus had learned something most people never did. Silence wasn't weakness. It was control. The announcement came on a Thursday morning, delivered via email and followed by an all-hands meeting in the main conference hall. Marcus arrived early to set up chairs, test the microphone, and make sure the projector worked. By the time employees began filing in, he'd already retreated to the back corner, leaning against the wall with a dust cloth in his hand. The room buzzed with energy. People whispered predictions, exchanged theories, clutched their phones like lifelines. The merger had been rumored for weeks, but now it was official. Contracts signed, press releases drafted, futures suddenly malleable. Helen stood at the podium, composed and professional in a charcoal suit. She welcomed everyone, outlined the details, and assured them that the transition would be smooth. "New opportunities," she said. "Growth potential. A chance to be part of something bigger." Marcus watched from the back, his expression neutral. When the meeting ended, employees poured into the hallways like water breaking through a dam. Excitement crackled in the air. Some people were ecstatic, others anxious, but everyone was talking. The cafeteria became a war room where alliances were formed and strategies discussed. "This is our moment," Derek said, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. "If we position ourselves right, we could all move up." Sandra nodded eagerly. "I heard they're creating 3 new VP positions. And bonuses," someone else added. "Definitely bonuses." Marcus walked past their table, carrying a bin of recycling. No one looked up. "Hey, Marcus," Derek called suddenly, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "You hear about the merger?" Marcus stopped, turning slightly. "I did. Think it'll affect you?" "Not sure yet." Derek grinned. "Well, I mean, janitorial work is pretty stable, right? Always need someone to clean up." Laughter rippled around the table. Marcus didn't smile, didn't frown. He simply nodded once and continued walking. Behind him, someone whispered, "God, imagine being stuck in the same position for years. I'd lose my mind." Another voice, "He probably can't afford to do anything else." Marcus emptied the recycling bin and moved on. The jokes grew sharper over the following days. In the break room, someone commented on his lunch, a plain sandwich and an apple, and said he must be really budgeting. In the parking lot, a group of analysts stood near his truck, laughing at the rust and the duct tape holding the side mirror in place. "That thing even run?" one of them asked. Marcus unlocked the door. "Gets me where I need to go." "Barely," someone muttered. He climbed in, started the engine, it coughed twice before catching, and drove away without looking back. At home that evening, his phone rang. It was Helen. "Hey," she said, her voice warm but tired. "How are you holding up?" "Fine," Marcus said. "You?" "Busy. This merger is insane. But listen, we need to talk about next week's board meeting." "I figured. You ready?" Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter, staring out the window at the darkening sky. "As ready as I'll ever be." Helen paused. "They're going to be shocked, you know." "I know. Some of them have been unkind." "I know that too." She sighed. "You're too patient, Marcus. I would have said something by now." "Saying something doesn't change what people believe," he replied. "Only time does that." "Well, time's almost up." They talked for a few more minutes, logistical details, meeting agendas, expectations. When they hung up, Marcus sat in the quiet of his small kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. He wasn't nervous. He'd been preparing for this moment for years, in a way. Not by rehearsing speeches or polishing his image, but by doing the work. By showing up every day, no matter how invisible he felt. By staying calm when others panicked. By carrying responsibilities others didn't even know existed. The next day, the office felt different. The merger had injected new life into the building. People dressed sharper, worked later, smiled wider. Ambition hung in the air like cologne. At lunch, Marcus sat at his usual corner table with his usual sandwich. Across the cafeteria, Derek's table had grown. 8 people now, all laughing, all animated. Sandra caught Marcus's eye and waved him over. He hesitated, then stood and walked across the room. "Marcus," she said brightly. "Seat, seat." "We were just talking about everyone's plans." He sat at the edge of the group, his lunch tray in front of him. "So," Derek said, leaning forward with exaggerated interest, "what are you doing these days?" "Still working here." Marcus nodded. "Still working here." A few people chuckled. Someone whispered something Marcus didn't catch. Another person, a newer hire named Jason, looked genuinely curious. "Do you like it? The janitorial work? I mean, it's honest," Marcus said simply. "But don't you want more?" Sandra pressed. "I mean, no offense, but you've been here forever. Don't you have bigger dreams?" Marcus took a bite of his sandwich, chewed slowly, and swallowed. "Dreams don't always look the way people expect." Derek snorted. "That's one way to say you're stuck." More laughter. Marcus didn't react. Jason shifted uncomfortably. "I think what Sandra means is—" "I know what she means," Marcus said, his tone even. "And I appreciate the concern. But I'm good." "Good," Derek repeated. "Man, I couldn't do what you do. No ambition, no growth, just the same thing every day." Marcus met his eyes. "Some jobs don't reward you with noise. They reward you with trust." The table went quiet for a moment. Derek frowned, unsure if he'd been insulted or complimented. Sandra forced a smile and changed the subject. Marcus finished his lunch in silence, listening as they returned to their plans, who would get promoted, who would get noticed, who would rise fastest. When he stood to leave, Derek called after him. "Hey Marcus, no hard feelings, right? We're just messing around." Marcus looked back. No hard feelings. But as he walked away, he heard someone say, "Poor guy. Probably can't even afford to quit." Another voice, "I bet he's been broke for years." Marcus threw away his trash and returned to work. The floors needed mopping. The windows needed cleaning. And in 6 days, the board meeting would arrive. The week passed in a blur of preparation. The office hummed with nervous energy as employees polished presentations, rehearsed pitches, and speculated endlessly about who would be invited to the board meeting. It was the event of the quarter, the moment when the merger would be finalized, new leadership structures announced, and futures decided. Marcus kept his routine. He arrived at 6, left at 3, and spoke only when spoken to. On Monday, someone spilled coffee in the hallway, and he cleaned it without comment. On Wednesday, the executive bathroom flooded, and he fixed the valve himself, saving the company a plumber's fee. On Friday, Derek walked past him in the lobby and said, "Still here? Huh?" Marcus nodded and continued pushing his cart. Nobody suspected anything. The board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. By 9:30, the executive conference room was filled with tension and expensive perfume. 23 people sat around the long mahogany table, board members, senior executives, department heads, and a handful of rising stars handpicked for their potential. Derek was there, seated near the middle, his suit freshly pressed and his confidence visible. Sandra sat 2 chairs down, clutching a leather portfolio. Jason, the newer hire, looked uncomfortable near the end of the table, clearly unsure why he'd been invited. Helen stood at the head of the table, reviewing notes on her tablet. The room murmured with hushed conversation. Predictions, anxieties, the occasional nervous laugh. At 9:55, the door opened. Marcus walked in. He wore his usual navy blue uniform, though it was cleaner than usual, pressed and tucked. He carried no briefcase, no portfolio, no coffee cup. Just himself. The room didn't react immediately. A few people glanced up, assumed he was there to refill water pitchers or check the thermostat, and returned to their conversations. Marcus walked slowly toward the head of the table. Derek noticed first. His eyes followed Marcus with confusion, then mild amusement. He nudged Sandra and whispered, "What's he doing?" Sandra looked up. Her expression shifted from curiosity to bewilderment. Marcus reached the head of the table and stopped beside Helen. The room gradually quieted as more people noticed. Whispers spread like ripples. "Is he presenting something?" Someone murmured. "Maybe maintenance issue?" Another guessed. Helen set down her tablet and looked at Marcus. Her expression was calm, almost serene. Then she turned to the room and cleared her throat. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here." Polite murmurs of acknowledgement. "Before we discuss the merger details," Helen continued, "I want to address something that's been a long time coming." The room leaned in slightly. Helen smiled. "Funny thing about this company. We pride ourselves on recognizing talent, on promoting from within, on valuing hard work and dedication. And yet, sometimes the most valuable person in the room is the one we overlook entirely." A few confused glances exchanged across the table. "Our new CEO," Helen said, letting the words hang in the air, "has been here all along. He started years ago in a position most of you probably never noticed. He's cleaned your offices, fixed your problems, and kept this building running when nobody else could." Derek's smile faltered. Sandra's eyes widened. "His name," Helen said, looking directly at Marcus, "is Marcus Reed, and he's sitting right here." The silence was absolute. Someone laughed nervously. A short, sharp sound that died instantly. Another person shook their head slowly, as if trying to dislodge a misunderstanding. "Wait," Derek said, his voice too loud in the quiet room. "Wait, what?" Helen's expression didn't change. "Marcus is the majority stakeholder of this company. He's been the principal owner for 3 years. And as of this morning, following the merger finalization, he's officially our chief executive." Jason's mouth opened slightly. Sandra stared at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. Derek looked between Helen and Marcus, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something close to panic. "No," Derek said. "That's a no. He's the janitor." "He was," Helen corrected. "He also happens to own 62% of this company's shares." The room erupted into whispers. Someone dropped a pen. Another person leaned back in their chair so hard it creaked. Marcus stood quietly, his hands folded in front of him, his expression unreadable. "How?" Sandra breathed. Helen looked at Marcus, offering him the floor. He took a slow breath and finally spoke. "Some of you remember the fire 7 years ago," he said. His voice was steady, calm, the same voice that had said "good morning" to them 1,000 times without reply. The electrical failure in the server room. It happened at night. I was the only one in the building. A few people nodded slowly, remembering. I evacuated the building, shut down the power grid, and contained the fire before it spread. Saved the servers, saved the data, saved the company from losing everything. He paused. The owner at the time, Mr. Harrison, he wanted to thank me. I told him I was just doing my job. Derek's face had gone pale. He insisted, Marcus continued, offered me a bonus. I told him I didn't need money. I needed security, stability, so we made a deal. He sold me shares at a discount over time deducted from my paycheck. Took years. But eventually, I owned enough that when he wanted to retire, he sold me the rest. Sandra's hand covered her mouth. I kept working, Marcus said simply. Kept the uniform, kept the routine. Because this company doesn't need a CEO who sits in an office all day. It needs someone who understands how it works from the ground up. Helen stepped forward. Marcus has been overseeing operations quietly for 3 years. Every major decision, every financial move, every strategic pivot, he's been part of it. You just didn't know. The room was frozen. Derek finally found his voice. Why didn't you say anything? Marcus looked at him. Would you have listened? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. I don't flaunt what I have, Marcus said quietly. I lead when the company needs me to. And right now, with this merger, it needs me visible. Jason, at the end of the table, spoke softly.
I'm sorry.
We didn't know. Marcus nodded. I know you didn't. No one apologized. No one stood to shake his hand. They simply sat there, recalculating everything they thought they knew. Helen placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Shall we begin? Marcus pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. The meeting continued. The meeting proceeded in a strange, suspended silence. Helen walked through the merger details, timelines, restructuring plans, new departmental alignments, but the usual energy was absent. People nodded at the right moments, took notes mechanically, but their eyes kept drifting back to Marcus at the head of the table. He sat comfortably, listening more than speaking. Occasionally he'd lean forward to clarify a point or ask Helen a question, his voice measured and thoughtful. There was no performance in his demeanor, no attempt to suddenly embody what they expected a CEO to look like. He was simply himself, the same man who'd mopped their floors yesterday, now making decisions that would shape their futures. Derek hadn't spoken since the revelation. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the papers in front of him. Sandra kept glancing at Marcus sideways, as if studying a puzzle she couldn't solve. Jason looked genuinely uncomfortable, his discomfort born not from judgment but from the weight of his own previous assumptions. Halfway through the presentation, Helen paused. Marcus, do you want to address the restructuring? He nodded and stood slowly. The room's attention snapped to him completely. The merger brings opportunities, he began. But it also brings challenges. We're doubling our workforce, expanding into markets we've never touched, and integrating systems that don't currently talk to each other. His voice was calm, authoritative without being aggressive. He spoke the way someone does when they've spent years observing, learning, understanding the machinery of a place from the inside out. I'm not interested in cleaning house, he continued. I'm not interested in proving anything to anyone or making examples. What I am interested in is building a company where competence matters more than appearance. Where the person who solves the problem gets recognized, not just the person who talks about solving it. A few people shifted in their seats. Over the next quarter, we'll be evaluating everyone. Not based on titles or tenure, but on contribution. If you've been doing the work, you'll be rewarded. If you've been skating by on charm and politics, you'll have a chance to prove your value differently. Derek's face flushed red. This isn't personal, Marcus said. And for a moment his eyes landed on Derek. It's practical. We need people who care about the work, not just the paycheck. He sat back down. Helen resumed the presentation. When the meeting finally ended, people filed out slowly, quietly. No one rushed to network or congratulate each other. The usual post-meeting chatter was replaced by an awkward, contemplative silence. Derek was one of the first to leave, his expression stony. Sandra lingered near the door, looking like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Jason approached Marcus hesitantly as he gathered his things. "Mr. Reed," Jason said, then corrected himself. "Marcus, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for any assumptions I made." Marcus looked at him, really looked at him, and saw sincerity. "You weren't cruel, Jason. You were just following the crowd. That's different." Jason nodded, relieved, and left. Helen waited until the room was empty before speaking. "That went better than I expected." "Did it?" Marcus asked. "No one walked out. No one threw anything. I'd call that a win." Marcus smiled faintly. "Low bar." "Welcome to leadership," she said, gathering her tablet. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine. You look tired." "I am tired," Marcus admitted. "But not because of this. I've been tired for years. At least now I don't have to hide it." Helen squeezed his shoulder. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. You're biased. Your family. I'm also the chairlady. And I'm telling you, you handled that with more grace than most people would have." Marcus didn't respond. He looked around the empty boardroom. The leather chairs, the polished table, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was a long way from the supply closet where he'd spent his mornings. And yet, it didn't feel that different. Responsibility was still responsibility, no matter where you carried it. Over the following days, the office transformed. Word spread quickly, faster than email, faster than official announcements. The janitor was the CEO. The man they'd mocked, ignored, and dismissed owned the company they worked for. Some people were embarrassed. Others were defensive. A few tried to rebuild bridges they'd burned without realizing there was a bridge at all. Derek avoided Marcus entirely, taking different hallways, eating lunch at different times. When they finally passed each other in the lobby, Derek nodded stiffly and kept walking. Sandra approached Marcus in the break room one afternoon. "I owe you an apology," she said. Marcus was refilling his water bottle. "For what?" "For everything. The comments. The assumptions." He looked at her. "You weren't wrong about everything, Sandra. I did drive an old truck. I did wear the same uniform. Those were facts. But we judged you for them. You judged what you saw. People do that. That doesn't make it right." Marcus screwed the cap back on his bottle. "No, it doesn't. But it makes it human." He paused. "If you want to make it right, do better work. That matters more than apologies." She nodded slowly and left. The truth was, Marcus didn't need apologies. He didn't need validation or recognition. What had been revealed in that boardroom wasn't for his benefit. It was for theirs. A reminder that success doesn't always announce itself. That the person you overlook might be the person holding everything together. He still wore his uniform most days. Still drove his old truck. Still arrived early and left quietly. But now, when he walked through the hallways, people saw him differently. Not with fear or resentment, but with something closer to respect. Or maybe it was just awareness, the sudden understanding that they'd been blind. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Marcus stood in the parking lot at dusk, keys in hand. The building glowed behind him, lights scattered across its face like stars. Jason appeared beside him, heading to his own car. "Long day?" he asked. "They're all long days," Marcus replied. Jason smiled. "Fair enough." He hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why didn't you ever correct us? When we made assumptions, when we joked. You could have said something." Marcus considered the question. "Because some lessons people need to learn on their own. If I told you who I was, you would have changed how you treated me. But you wouldn't have changed how you think." Jason nodded slowly. "And now you know that quiet doesn't mean powerless. And maybe next time you meet someone you don't understand, you'll remember that." Jason extended his hand. Marcus shook it. "See you tomorrow, Marcus. See you tomorrow." Marcus climbed into his truck, turned the key, and listened to the engine sputter to life. He pulled out of the parking lot slowly, passing rows of newer, shinier vehicles. He didn't mind, because success, he'd learned, wasn't about being seen. It was about being certain of your value, your purpose, your worth, even when no one else was looking. And Marcus had always been certain. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the heaviest load. We live in a world that celebrates noise, the loud opinions, the flashy titles, the visible victories. But real strength often moves in silence. It shows up early, works without applause, and leads without needing credit. Don't mistake someone's humility for weakness or their patience for inability. The person you overlook today might be the one holding everything together. Treat everyone with dignity, because you never truly know what someone carries or who they really are. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and tell us what you learned in the comments below.